In today's video, we're going to look at the animated history of Poland, part 1. I'm so interested to see all the changing of shapes that Poland has gone through over the years. Now, if you do enjoy the video, please, it would mean so much to me. Hit that like button and subscribe.
If you live in Central or Eastern Europe, you probably grew up hearing the folktale of the three brothers, Lech, Czech and Rus, the three legendary patriarchs of the Slavic peoples. While out on a hunting trip, the brothers had a disagreement, as brothers do, on which prey to follow, leading them to split up. Czech, the eldest of the brothers, followed his prey to the Czech lands. Rus, the youngest, went east and became the founder of Russia, and Lech, in the middle, founded Poland.
That has got to be a myth, right? That has got to be a myth straight away. It certainly makes sense in the fact that brothers fight. However, for those three brothers to then basically start a country is slim to none. But it's a nice story. I do love myths because they can be so creative, can't they?
Because who cares about consistency? The tale differs slightly from place to place, but many include that Lech travelled north as he followed a beautiful white eagle. The eagle landed in its nest at sunset and looked very breathtaking against the red sky. Lech took this for an omen and decided that the land would be his new home. The white eagle is still a symbol of Poland, blazoned against the red sky of their flag.
Wow.
Indeed, Poland did begin with Slavic settlements. The Slavs are likely a civilization that emerged as remnants of the early Indo-European peoples who had migrated out of the Caucasus. From their homeland in Central Europe, they began to expand and migrate in response to the weakening of the Roman Empire. You'll remember this from previous episodes as the Great Migration period. The Poles loved their new home, which they shared with Germanic tribes from Scandinavia and the occasional Asian nomadic raiders. The Slavs of Poland were organized into smaller tribes living in and around the Baltic Sea and the Vistula River Delta. They united under Poland's first official leader, Mieszko. Mieszko was a Duke of the Polands. This was a good gig to have since the tribe eventually became the name of the whole country, Poland. Mieszko was a member of the noble house of Piast, whose dynasty would rule Poland for centuries. With his baptism in 966, the country slowly abandoned traditional Slavic paganism and adopted Western Christianity.
So we've learnt that the date that is seen as when Poland became a country was 966, and that's simply because that's when it started becoming a religious Catholic country, right? Now, obviously, I don't necessarily think that date is accurate. I don't think that's true to say because it was a country beforehand, but what you find is interesting is actually in the early days of Poland, it obviously wasn't called Poland, and it was a lot of different tribes. So the Slavic ones, the Germanic tribes. And I don't know how accurate that is because if you had a Roman Empire at that same time, then what's the chances of it only being tribes up north? I think that plays on that wrong stereotype that, for example, the barbarian, Germanic barbarians and things, fighting with no armor. And it just wasn't true. So actually, I don't know how accurate it is to say that they were just tribes, leading me to believe that actually Poland, not necessarily that it was called Poland, but it was a country or a large territory way before 966.
Mieszko's son Bolesław the Brave expanded the territory south into what he hoped would be a strong regional power, but alas, it was a bit too early for that still. He established the metropolitan see at Gniezno, forming the headquarters of what would become the Catholic Church in Poland. His consolidation of power led him to be crowned Poland's first official king, and then he died, all in the same year, which is great. The Piast dynasty was somewhat up and down, and internal conflicts often plagued the royal court. Until this guy, Casimir the Restorer, restored the monarchy's control, which come to think of it is probably why they called him the Restorer. He modernized Poland into a feudalist society, which came with all those cool things like knights and lords and castles. This helped secure the borders, who up until now had changed depending on who was king. The early kingdom, somewhat weaker than its neighbours, and strapped for cash, did however halt the Mongol invasion into Europe, having been sacked twice
Bloody
before.
Mongols.
Notable of this time was the Polish
Genghis.
relationship with the Germans, whose dukes and lords had come to possess large amounts of the West, and the Teutonic Knights, who had carved out a significant state for themselves in Livonia and Prussia, a land inhabited by pagans, frequently raided by crusaders. By the time Piast rule ended with Casimir the Great, Poland had lost much of its territory to its neighbours, but with a period of peace the state soon began to prosper and attract Jewish settlement. The counties in this area became a source of contention between the kings of Poland and the Holy Roman Empire, who fought over the local lords for fealty and allegiance. This resulted in these counties being very mixed, with populations of people from both kingdoms.
This is something that I always find quite interesting. In locations where, many years ago, when there was fighting, and so, for example, you see Poland has got bigger, it's got smaller, got bigger, got smaller. And so, for example, in locations like Pomerania, well, you're going to have the Polish people, and then when the Roman Empire and the Germans come through, they're going to have their people. How civilized were those areas? And actually, we've still got places like that today that basically may be controlled by one country, but they're still in the belief that, no, they are a part of a different country. And you still have that problem today. So what difficulty that caused is for me unknown, obviously, but would be interesting to find out.
The whole thing was very un-Bohemian, really. The Jews first settled Poland as merchants on popular trade routes. By this century, the Jewish people had settled in great numbers over many kingdoms in Europe and began their long and very sad history. They were expelled by the masses in all the countries they settled, and were often victims of massacres and worse, crusades. Successive expulsions led the population in Poland to swell, which was a comparatively more tolerant society, which became a center of Judaic learning and culture as the centuries continued. However, things weren't always super peachy, and anti-Jewish riots often erupted in Polish towns, and synagogues were frequently burned. King Casimir the Great, dying without an heir, left his kingdom to his nephew Louis, the King of Hungary. Louis left his now 3 kingdoms to his daughters, one of whom died unexpectedly, the other, who was supposed to inherit Poland but inherited Hungary instead, and the last one, Jadwiga, who got Poland. The nobles of Poland welcomed Louis's daughter and crowned her king. Yes, king, not queen.
So we learnt about this. Well, I say I learnt about this. In a previous video it was said as queen, but loads of comments said that no, it was king.
And ask. Jadwiga's life would not be unlike a medieval television drama, as she was simultaneously engaged to both the Grand Duke of Lithuania, Jogaila, whose kingdom was huge and powerful, and the Habsburg Duke of Austria, who was inbred and fat. I think she made the right choice. The union of Jadwiga and Vladislav formed the Polish-Lithuanian Union, which was now the largest country in Europe under a single monarchy. The Lithuanians had become a strong military power in the previous century, capturing large amounts of Russian and Mongol land. The now combined countries spread from the Baltic to the Black Sea. The Lithuanians, with their far smaller population, never ventured too far from their castles, why would you, and preferred to rule Ruthenia from Livonia instead. So by the time of the Union, the much larger Polish population came to dominate the Ruthenia lands, spreading the language and the culture, eventually dwarfing their Livonian allies. The Teutonic Order, that German state on the Baltic, had become somewhat of a bad neighbor, leading raids, crusades, and plundering castles, or otherwise stumbling drunk into Polish-Lithuanian territory, starting fires and whatnot. The union of the two states proved beneficial, handing the Knights a crushing defeat at the Battle of Grunwald in 1410. They also fought numerous wars with the Muscovites, Tatars, and Ottomans. Noteworthy of the Hegelian period was the efficiency of the feudal system and the pseudo-democratic nature of the parliament, who set up sophisticated bureaucracy for king approval, or disapproval if you are unlucky. Within just a few decades, the Teutonic Order had completely lost their state, with the western half being annexed directly into Poland and the rest becoming a fief of the Polish crown. This gave access of Poland to the prosperous Baltic seaports and an explosion in trade. Keep your eye on this, it becomes important later. The Prussian fief would later be inherited by a duke from Brandenburg, a state within the Holy Roman Empire, a trend which would become ever more troublesome as lords within the HRE would increasingly inherit lands outside the imperial borders. The HRE was weird, don't worry about it. Acquiring Danzig or Gdańsk had huge economic benefits, and cities swelled in size in response to the trade boom.
I have to ask a quick question now. I was always under the impression it's called Gdansk. However, Charlie, my lovely wife, who went to Gdansk, for the Christmas market last year, and we filmed. She's got a Polish friend at work who actually says it's just Dansk. You don't pronounce the G. Can you guys confirm that, please? Is it Gdansk or is it Dansk?
Like Poznan, Lwów, and the capital Kraków, and most notably Warsaw. Warsaw, or Warszawa in Polish, was up to this point just a small fishing village. Legend has it that a fisherman named Warsz happened upon a mermaid in the Vistula River named Shawa. The two married and found the town of Warszawa. The Poles, like most Europeans, were often embroiled in wars, and this made famous their heavy cavalry, the Winged Hussars, which I'm sure I'll be mobbed and lynched if I don't talk about. Initially a contingent of Hungarian mercenaries, the Hussars soon became an elite shock cavalry so powerful they allowed the Poles to win many otherwise hopeless battles. The Hussars became the envy of Europe, the most powerful and disciplined heavy cavalry the Middle Ages had ever known, and are still a matter of intense national symbolism of Poland. The 16th century was a really big one. It included the Protestant Reformation, affecting mostly German parts of the kingdom, wars against the encroaching Ottomans invading Europe, advancing in science and literature with Copernicus devising the heliocentric model of the solar system, the nationwide codification of the Polish language, and the biggest one, the changing of the Polish-Lithuanian Union into the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, a single political entity ratified by the Polish Parliament, or Sejm, with elected rather than hereditary kings. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, or just Poland for short, became a center of power and commerce, and a bulwark against invading Turks would become a larger and larger problem for the European powers since their humble beginnings in Central Asia.
It really does seem like Poland, throughout its time, has been the sort of the border of Europe that has defended a lot of us. Now, obviously, there's loads of infighting through this period between the English, the French, the Romans, the Norwegian Vikings and things. But Poland, or now the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, for example, always seems to be the wall that stops, for example, the Ottomans and the Russians and anyone that is on the east side. And it's same to this day, isn't it? That Poland is that wall that is protecting the rest of Europe.
During the Polish-Muscovite War, the Poles became involved in the Russian succession crisis, or the Time of Troubles, and began flexing their muscles with their famous hussars. They even occupied Moscow for a short period, but were soon driven out because invading Russia is simply impossible unless you are the Mongols. The series of northern wars and the Russo-Polish War left the Commonwealth in a very precarious and weakened state. This was aggravated by the election of Polish kings, which opened the door for other nations to meddle in Polish affairs, which they did. A lot. During the wars, the Commonwealth lost the territory of Livonia and was devastated by the so-called Swedish deluge.
I just want to talk about then elected kings. Now, in my mind, in today's day and age, there is no need for a king or queen. We do not need them because countries now, most of the time, are civil. They work on a diplomatic way. And they have governments that run the country on behalf, like for example in the UK, run on behalf of the king or queen. They don't do anything anymore. However, looking at it, and my initial thoughts were, what a great idea having an elected king, because you think, well, it's like having a prime minister. However, we see the problems with elections. Look at us in the UK at the moment with people like the Tories in government. You know, I'm obviously Labour supporter, I'm centre-left, but having the Tories in government for such a long period of time and the damage they have done to our country, because elections can easily be swayed, and slogans and rhetoric can easily be used in a bad way. And that's what has happened in the UK, you know, with Brexit having Tories. It's the working class nationalists that have been up on the rise. And that's very similar in a lot of countries. Now, maybe having a king or queen is a better thing than having a government, because you're not going to get the political sway, maybe, like that they're talking about. Now, I'm not saying there's right or wrong in having the king or queen or in a government. I'm just saying food for thought, maybe, that having that elected head of state, or such as a king or a prime minister, is a bad thing, because you'll get interference. You heard about Trump's election and the interference with Russia, how they've used social media to influence people to vote for Trump. And I'm sure that's the same over in the UK. So maybe there's too much political interference, and it's not good for a country.
Leaving much of the nation in ruins. Poland became weakened during the Great Northern War against Sweden, and during the War of the Polish Succession, it became increasingly clear that Poland's fate was going to be decided by its neighbours. The Polish parliament became ineffective due to complicated veto laws which made passing reforms or mounting resistance to invasion nothing if not impossible. The political limbo and the sheer size of the Commonwealth started to make cutting pieces out of it look pretty attractive. The last king of Poland, Stanislav II, was elected in 1764 as a puppet of the Russian Empire, aided greatly by the fact that he was in bed with Catherine the Great. Stanislav did attempt reform to try and save face, but was aware the kingdom was on its last breath. Before long, the first partition of Poland was enacted, dividing the outlying provinces between Austria, Prussia, and Russia. In dire straits, the parliament was powerless to stop the invading troops, and forced to ratify the new borders. The Great Sejm tried once more to reform by drafting a formal constitution inspired by the liberties of the French Revolution, but it was enough to provoke Russia again, who saw France as an enemy and Poland as a sympathizer to anti-monarchical sentiments. Pro- and anti-constitutional forces became embroiled in a war, and Russian forces invaded to broker a defeat to the Republican movement. With an agreement signed with Prussia, the two nations annexed more territory in the Second Partition, reducing Poland to 1/3 its size and population. The king was horrifically unpopular. The army was in shambles. The parliament was divided and powerless. The common people were furious, and insurrections led to the National Rebellion, led by the military veteran Tadeusz Kościuszko. After an initial success, the rebels failed to garner support from many other nations and were defeated by the surrounding powers. In 1795, the Austrians, Prussians, and Russians decided to put an end to the rebellious Poles and invaded them from 3 sides. The Third Partition of Poland, as it became known, wiped Poland off the face of the map for the next century.
That's just crazy. It's crazy to think that at some stage there was no Poland. Wow. We'll get onto it, obviously, but the fact that Poland was able to become Poland again, from nothing. As I said, I think the Polish flag needs to have a phoenix on it, right? A phoenix rising from the ashes.
Millions of Poles now found themselves subject to whichever nation they were divided into, isolated from one another, and Poland ceased to exist.
Just crazy. So I think from that first part, what I'm getting is that Poland, to start off with, it wanted to expand. It wanted to get bigger. It wanted to improve their country when it was a country. Partly religious reasons, no doubt, but it was a country that wanted to get bigger. However, when you get to a certain size, sometimes you have less control, because especially like I was talking about, when you get certain areas that have part one country, part another, where it's constantly been going back and forth. Well, where do their allegiances lie? And therefore the army's going to get weaker, for example, and you're going to just have less control. So you also then had 3 countries: Prussia, Russia, and hang on, what was the other one? I'm going to find out. The Austrians. And you had the Austrians as well. You're surrounded. And if you're losing control, then they're going to take advantage, right? You've pushed their countries back. They're going to push back to you. And obviously, by the sounds of it, having an elected king, bad idea, because you lose even more control because of the influences, for example, from the Russian Empire. They were influencing. It's almost like our governments today. A little bit of coin in their pocket and they're anyone's. It's fascinating. I'm really looking forward to learning about part 2 and see the revival of Poland. But thank you so much for watching. Honestly, it means so much that you guys want to spend the time watching these videos. So please tell Google you've enjoyed the video. Make sure you like, leave a comment, and I'll catch you next time.